What we are going through for today is the update on what just happened at the beginning of this reset, so about 4 days ago, which was the balance tuning that came. The balance tuning that, for example, nerfed Protection Paladin, nerfed Enhancement Shaman, buffed a few other specs like the damage of Blood Decay, or straight up buffed Feral Druid or buffed Windwalker Monk. It buffed Holy Priest, but then also it tried to buff some of the more underperforming hero talent specs that were not used up to that point. We are talking about Frostfire for Frost Mage, we are still talking about Frostfire for Fire Mage, we are also talking about Deathstalker for Subtlety Rogue, we are talking about Farseer Elemental Shaman, we are also talking about buffing the non-breath builds of Frost Decay. So it's been enough days now, enough entries in both Mythic Plus and the Raid to try to see how much these specs have changed so far after the balance tuning. Looking at Mythic Plus first, of course, the week is still underway, so all of these numbers are still work in progress, so this is still bound to change, of course. One of the first things that is quite visible based on the balance tuning that happened is that now Blood Decay's damage buff has made it get closer to Protection Paladin's damage nerf, right? Lightsmith Protection Paladin was nerfed by quite a bit in terms of damage, so if you compare it, for example, to even just last week, so the major gap that Prot Paladin has over other tanks is now smaller. However, as we also mentioned when we looked at these changes, Protection Paladin was still remaining the best tank anyways, and even in terms of damage anyways, so it wasn't really going to change much in terms of shifting the meta. Another thing, of course, was the nerf. The bigger point of the balance tuning was the nerf given to Enhancement Shaman. Well, look up this week how Enhancement Shamans have been doing in Mythic Plus. Well, and this is the nerfed version of Enhancement Shaman. So clearly they're not showing many issues remaining the better performing spec when it comes to Mythic Plus and when it comes to damage. One of the interesting things related to these changes was the fact that, for example, Frost Decay's non-breath builds were buffed. So the question is, for example, would a Frost Decay in Mythic Plus, right, try to change their build away from breath? The answer is no. Even if we look at the timing only after the balance tuning, the majority, in fact, is it all? All of the top results this week still have Frost Decay run with breath builds, even after non-breath builds have been buffed. If we switch from Mythic Plus to the Raid, we have pretty much the same thing. Frost Decays are still running breath builds even after the changes. One of the other changes that happened to specs was also Elemental Shaman, because Elemental Shaman had gotten its Farseer build buffed. After lots of the changes going on in this season about the hero talent power of Elemental, Stormbringer ended up taking over completely. After, just before that, it was Farseer that was very powerful. Now, though, what is more visible in the picks of the Shaman is that Farseer would have been the better pick, or technically could have been the better pick in single target. So as we go through the top keys this week, it's not weird to see that Stormbringer in Mythic Plus is indeed still the choice for Elemental Shaman. Where we do see, though, more difference is when you move over to the Raid. Because, for example, you already start seeing a few more Farseer picks, even on a non-single target boss like Bloodbound Horror. But, for example, as you go to the first of the pure single target bosses in the Raid, it is just now Farseer. So the top results now in this reset are now practically all Farseer. The first Stormbringer is rank 34, right? So when it comes to single target, we have seen the first clear change of this patch with hero talents, with now Farseer being more playable and also practically the main choice now when it comes to single target bosses. The other one of the questions about hero talents was about Frost and Fire. Because Frost and Fire had gotten a lot of changes around their Frostfire 3. By all accounts, for Fire Mage it was buffed so much it was supposed to be now slightly better than Sun Fury, whereas for Frost Mage it now became sort of a possible alternative to what they were already playing as Spellslinger. So if we go over to Frost Mage and see what exactly changed, we can see that in Mythic Plus, Mages as Frost are still primarily playing Spellslinger. You do have the odd Frostfire mage now, but still 95% of the picks are still Spellslinger. And in the raid, the treatment is about the same. Spellslinger is still the default choice for Frost mages, even after the balance tuning happened this reset. When you switch over from Frost Mage to Fire Mage, we do have at least one change. Because with Fire Mage now, we have the first of the clear changes. You know, these are the now Mythic Plus keys run by Fire Mages in this week, and you can see that now the majority of the Fire Mages are now playing Frostfire over Sun Fury in this reset. If you switch from Mythic Plus to the raid in this reset, we also get a similar look. Now, most of the mages are playing now Frostfire. So that is the second one of our effective changes from the balance tuning that we have gotten. The fact that now Elemental Shaman is playing Farseer when it comes to single target fights in the raid, whereas Fire Mage not only is playing Frostfire in the raid, they are also playing Frostfire in Mythic Plus. We also have seen the effects of the tuning from the raid. 26th of November is when the patch went live in NA and then 27th in EU, and you can see the drop of enhancement in performance. You can see the heavy growth of Fire Mage in performance. A few of the other buffed specs, for example, Feral Druid has been going up. The other buffed spec, Windwalker Monk, has started going up. The other nerfed spec was Survival, which also has gone down in performance in these few days of this new reset. The other question mark we had was about Subtlety, because Subtlety was also buffed in its Deathstalker 3. So time to go and check exactly if Deathstalker has now turned into the default choice. And what we have as a result is that if you go through the raid, you can start seeing now Subtlety Rogue switching almost fully over to Deathstalker. We still have the last few bosses played as Trickster for now, so that's where this hero talent is still holding up on, the last couple of bosses in the raid. In Mythic Plus, it is more of a mixed affair for now. It's still slightly leaning in favor of Trickster overall when it comes to top keys, but now there is definitely a much higher contest of Deathstalker when it comes to the, at the very least, options of Rogue. So it's another pretty successful set of balance tuning that is now pushing another spec to have more options in its hero talents. After Elemental bringing up Farseer to being playable in the raid, after Frostfire being brought for Fire Mage in particular to be viable, you have the one for Subtlety as well. Now, other specs are less visible to see in their changes because, as mentioned, those were just flat damage increases to the entire spec, not really to a particular hero talent. So seeing what has changed, for example, for Windwalker or for Feral, it's just they are doing more damage in general compared to before. Obviously, being buffed by 2 or 3 or even 5% in the case of Windwalker is not really enough to suddenly turn you into a meta spec, right? For example, in Mythic Plus, but you're definitely in a better position than you were just last reset. Talking about Mythic Plus, it is something that we will likely continue to monitor this week, but also the next weeks, is what we said a few days ago, which is the weakening of the reds in the top keys. Even now, for example, top 3 keys don't even include a Frost DK, and those are 3 different groups. They are three different teams, neither of them running with a Frost DK. And then if we extend this to the top 10, you only have 3 DKs, 2 of which are part of the same comp, the same group, whereas every other group of these guys is different and they don't run a Frost DK either. So that continues to be for now our call for the week, the weakening of Frost DK at the top end of Mythic Plus, until eventually perhaps the bubble will pop and there will be now more freedom for the last spot of DPS in Mythic Plus. For now, the stocks are pretty high when it comes to Mage and when it comes to Balanced Druid. We have also seen some Rogues making room in these kind of top keys. So we see here Balance, we see here Rogue, and we see here the collection of Mage picks. Although that doesn't have much to do with what we are talking about today, which are the effects of the balance tuning. The other nerf we talked about and visualized here was the one to Survival, which was going to be more impactful for them in the raid, because it also nerfed Pack Leader. And Pack Leader is primarily run in the raid. But when you go over to Mythic Plus, that's not really something that you care about because you play Sentinel in Mythic Plus. The last of the buffs did not go the way of the DPS, instead it went the way of the healers, and it was the buff to Holy Priest. Now, Holy Priest has gotten quite close now to the rest of the gang. If you look at the median average, now Resto Shaman, which is, by the way, about 40,000 HPS behind Mistweaver, so we are talking about 3%. This is 3%, but between Shaman and Priest now, there is 30,000 DPS as well, so it's also 3% gap. So at best, from Priest all the way up to Mistweaver, it's a 6% difference in healing. If you want to better visualize the results over time, you can just check going back the entire tier. You can just check the last week worth of results from the 26th of November. The buff comes in and Holy Priest starts doing slightly better, which is more or less what the buff was intended to do. All the other healers pretty much continued the exact same. The only one that went up was Holy because they were buffed. That is the other one of the positive results. Of course, this result still has absolutely zero impact when it comes to Mythic Plus. As soon as you start getting into any kind of competitive level, Holy Priests of course disappear, especially when you consider that the other popular one is Discipline. And the same goes for the other specs we have mentioned being buffed, so being in a positive situation like Windwalker and like Feral. It's good that Feral was buffed by 3% damage or that Windwalker was buffed by 5% damage. They're still not really going to be rising quite highly when it comes to very meta compositions in Mythic Plus. They might find more solace, as mentioned, when it comes to the results in the raid. In terms of DPS, we can see here a bit clunky because it's the entire tier, but you can see here Feral going up. You can see Windwalker buffed going up. You can see the new Fire Mage playing Frostfire going very much up, as well as the nerfs of Enhancement and Survival being very visible in here. So for now, these have been the effects about halfway through this week after the reset brought us the balance tuning that affected with nerfs and with buffs quite a few of the specs. So with all of these changes mentioned, it is now time to leave each other on this Saturday. If there were doubts on Friday being the weekend, now we are certain we are right in the weekend on this Saturday. Starting, of course, our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, crazy, the video is being finished like 8 hours before the deadline. It always feels nice to be done so early.